Step into a morning from 40,000 years ago, when nature reigned in silence and mystery. The rising sun cast long shadows through a primeval forest, where every tree had stood for centuries and none had ever known the sound of a saw. A man walks for days through this green vastness, his bare feet intimately familiar with every type of terrain, carrying something precious in his calloused hands, a stone. Not just any stone, a fragment of volcanic obsidian, black as the deepest night, sharp as a newly forged modern blade. Each facet reflected light like natural glass, its edges keen enough to split a hair. He had traveled over 300 kilometers to find it, navigating landscapes that shifted like dreamscapes. Ice-capped mountains, fertile valleys where mammoths grazed, wild rivers that ran nameless. But this epic journey does not end with him. He will not keep this precious obsidian. On his back, a collection of other objects that defied logic. Iridescent seashells that had traveled hundreds of kilometers away from the sea, still carrying the echo of waves in their calcareous spirals. Golden amber from ancient northern pines, with prehistoric insects perfectly preserved inside them like tiny time capsules. Red ochre that looked like dried blood from the earth itself, extracted from mineral deposits in sacred sites known only to a few tribes. Each item told a story of epic journeys that would make Marco Polo seem like a casual tourist, of invisible networks that connected tribes separated by impassable mountains and furious rivers, of a trust that transcended languages and cultures. His muscles ached, his feet bled, but he carried more than object. He carried promises, alliances, dreams of future generations. How was this possible? How did our ancestors, with no GPS to navigate, no maps to consult, not even a wheel to facilitate transport, manage to create the first global trade network in history? And even more intriguing, why did they risk their lives to do it? The treasure hidden in the caves scene, archaeological excavation, delicate hands removing dirt from ancient objects, brushes revealing millennia-old secrets. In 1868, in the Cro-Magnon cave in France, archaeologists made a discovery that would forever change our understanding of our ancestors. Among the bones of 28,000-year-old humans, carefully arranged in elaborate graves, they found something that shouldn't have been there. Mollusk shells from the Mediterranean, over 200 kilometers away. It wasn't just one or two lost shells. There were hundreds, carefully crafted into jewelry, drilled with impossible precision to create necklaces and bracelets. It was just the beginning of an archaeological revelation that would spread over decades. Site after site revealed the same impossible pattern. In Sungir, Russia, beneath layers of ice and time, a boy perhaps 12 years old, dead for 30,000 years, was buried with over 3,000 perfectly spherical ivory beads and Arctic fox teeth, materials that traveled thousands of kilometers across frozen tundras and dangerous forests. Each bead took hours to carve. The complete set represented over 2,000 hours of meticulous craftsmanship. In Australia, even more impressive discoveries awaited. Stone axes made in New Guinea reached the mainland 40,000 years ago, crossing the Torres Strait in primitive rafts through waters infested with sharks and sea crocodiles. But they weren't just utilitarian tools. They were works of art, polished to a shine like mirrors, decorated with patterns that told stories we have lost forever. At the Blombos site in South Africa, fragments of red ochre engraved with complex geometric patterns date back 75,000 years, the oldest evidence of human symbolic art. But chemical analyses revealed something extraordinary. The ochre was not local. It had traveled hundreds of kilometers across deserts and savannas, carried by human hands determined to create beauty. The numbers are impressive, but it's what they represent that truly takes our breath away. A global trade network functioning long before agriculture, cities, writing, even the domestication of controlled fire. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors not only survived in a hostile world, they built connections that defied geography itself. Dr. Clive Gamble, an archaeologist at the University of Southampton, spent decades mapping these ancestral networks and discovered that prestige objects regularly circulated in networks extending over 2,000 kilometers during the Upper Paleolithic. Imagine, in an era when a 50-kilometer journey was an epic expedition that could take weeks and cost lives, materials traveled continental distances with a regularity that suggests established routes and highly organized exchange systems. Isotopic evidence, chemical analyses of the bones themselves, reveals that some individuals born in one region spent years of their lives in places thousands of kilometers away, returning laden with knowledge and exotic objects. They were the first cosmopolitans in human history. The psychology of social survival. Scene group around a campfire, careful gestures of exchange, intense glances that communicate more than words. But why risk your life on deadly journeys for a shell or a colored stone? Why leave the relative safety of the known tribe to venture into territories where every shadow could hide a predator? Every strange sound could announce a hostile tribe. The answer takes us to the beating heart of what it means to be human. Robin Dunbar, an Oxford anthropologist, proposed that the human brain can maintain stable and meaningful relationships with approximately 150 people, the famous Dunbar's number. This neurological limitation is not accidental. It is the product of millions of years of social evolution. During the Paleolithic, this limit created both extraordinary opportunities and deadly problems. Imagine a tribe of 30 people facing a harsh winter in an ice age. The resources that sustained the tribe during the summer are now dramatically scarce. Tensions that simmered beneath the surface during times of abundance now explode into open conflict. Alliances carefully built over years unravel in a matter of days. Families split, friendships turn into rivalries, and the very survival of the group is at stake. But what if this same isolated tribe could access a network of 500 people spread over 1,000 kilometers? Suddenly, it's no longer a tribe fighting the elements alone. It's part of a prehistoric social security system, a mutual support network that could mean the difference between extinction and prosperity. Exchange was not just economic. It was deeply emotional, viscerally political, and romantically transformative. A necklace of seashells around the neck of a mountain woman who had never seen the ocean not only demonstrated material wealth, it told the epic story of an impossible journey, of superhuman courage, of connections that transcended geography and language. It was Instagram before Instagram existed, LinkedIn before anyone dreamed of professional networks, Facebook before the concept of social media. Modern genetic evidence obtained through ancient DNA analysis confirms something extraordinary. Paleolithic populations maintained constant gene flow across enormous distances, suggesting that exchange networks also functioned as sophisticated matrimonial networks. Love and commerce walked together along ancestral paths, creating a genetic and cultural tapestry of impressive complexity. Young people left their native tribes carrying precious gifts, not only to establish commercial relations, but to find genetically diverse partners, ensuring the health of future generations. It was a survival strategy that operated on multiple dimensions simultaneously: economic, social, genetic, and cultural. But there were deep emotional risks. Archaeologists have found evidence of post-travel stress syndrome in Paleolithic skeletons, patterns of bone and tooth wear that suggest chronic anxiety in individuals who spent long periods away from their tribes. Connection has a psychological price that our species is still paying. The stone and bone internet, seen storytellers gesticulating dramatically, faces illuminated by flickering fire, voices carrying invisible maps. Without writing to record information, without phones to coordinate, without the internet to share data, how did the logistics of this global trade network work? How did they coordinate deliveries across entire continents? How did they ensure that a tribe in northern Europe knew that amber was available on the Baltic coast, or that warriors on the Asian steppes needed new spearheads? The answer lies in a technology that still dominates the world today: information. But not information as we know it. Living, breathing information, embodied in narratives that adapted and evolved with each transmission. Our ancestors were social data processing machines of impressive efficiency. Every encounter between groups was a synchronized explosion of information: who had what and in what quantities, where to find rare materials during which seasons, which routes were safe and which were blocked by hostile tribes or predators, which groups were reliable allies and which had a history of betrayal. They developed a revolutionary system of distributed cultural memory, specialized knowledge carefully spread among individuals, like nodes in a biological neural network. An elder knew the specific properties of dozens of types of stone for tools. Another knew where to find rare medicinal plants 500 kilometers away. A woman mastered the complex maritime routes of amber, including wind and tide patterns that changed seasonally. Stories functioned as a surprisingly precise narrative GPS. When you see the mountain that looks like a sleeping mammoth at sunset, follow the river for 3 full moons until you reach the stones that sing with the north wind. Oral epics carried layers of geographical, meteorological, political, and cultural information, multi-dimensional access codes for humanity's first internet. Each story was a network protocol, each storyteller a human router, each audience a node in the network. Crucial information was encoded in myths, legends, and songs that ensured its precise transmission across generations. Altering a single word could mean the difference between finding water on a journey or dying of thirst in the desert. Art on the walls of the Lascaux Caves, created 17,000 years ago, may have served as sophisticated commercial maps, with symbols representing specific routes, seasonal resources, and tribal territories. Each cave painting was potentially a complex instruction manual for traveler traders, a Paleolithic Google Maps etched in stone for eternity. Modern computational analyses of European cave art reveal consistent patterns that suggest a cartographic code shared among cultures separated by thousands of kilometers. Similar symbols appear in caves from Spain to Russia, suggesting an international visual language for navigation and trade. The Dance of Trust. Scene. Palpable tension between two groups, cautious gestures, objects being examined with reverence and suspicion. But how to trust complete strangers in a world without written laws, without police, without contracts or courts? How to ensure that an exchange would be honest when you might never see the person on the other side again? How to establish credit when there are no banks or common currency? The answer evolved through thousands of years of relentless social selection, complex rituals of trust-building that were simultaneously theater, religion, and international diplomacy. Groups arriving in foreign territories did not appear by surprise like invaders. They signaled their approach for days or even weeks. Through carefully coded smoke signals, drums whose rhythms transmitted peaceful intentions, and valuable offerings left in specific locations like letters of introduction. The exchange process was theatrical, almost religious in its solemnity and precision. First, elaborate demonstrations of non-aggression, weapons left behind in visible locations, open hands kept in plain sight, children brought along with the group. No one brings children to a war. Then small gifts offered without any apparent expectation of return. A dance of commercial courtship that could last for days and involved rituals of food, music, and storytelling. Archaeologists have found fascinating evidence of neutral exchange zones, specific locations where multiple tribes met regularly, like prehistoric seasonal fairs. Grotte du Renne, in France, shows archaeological layers with materials from 5 different cultures deposited over millennia, suggesting an active trade hub for longer than many modern civilizations have existed. These locations were carefully maintained as sacred territories, where violence was an absolute taboo. They even developed sophisticated systems of Paleolithic credit, gifts given without immediate expectation of return, but with the deep social understanding that they would be remembered in future encounters. It was strategic generosity that built reputations across generations, creating social currency more valuable than any material object. Heart-opening rituals involve sharing personal stories, demonstrating controlled vulnerability, and even allowing strangers to touch sacred objects. It was an ancestral psychological hacking process designed to activate neurological circuits of empathy and reciprocity that still govern our modern social interactions. Evidence suggests that some tribes specialized as trust intermediaries, groups whose reputation for honesty was so established that they could facilitate exchanges between tribes that did not trust each other. They were the first banks in history, but based on social capital rather than financial capital. The birth of the symbolic scene, artisan working obsessively on a small sculpture, sweat on a concentrated face, every detail carrying cosmic meaning. But not everything was purely practical. Perhaps the most fascinating and philosophically profound aspect of these networks is how utilitarian objects gradually transformed into symbols of power, identity, and transcendence, the birth of human symbolic consciousness itself. The Venus of Willendorf, a small 25,000-year-old statuette found in Austria, was carved from limestone that does not naturally exist in the region. It traveled hundreds of kilometers before being transformed into art by skilled hands. Why? What was the real value of a small nude female sculpture that fit perfectly in the palm of one's hand? Why invest precious hours of craftsmanship in something that does not hunt animals, cut meat, or offer shelter? These statuettes, found in an impressive distribution from France to Siberia, may have been the first truly international currency in history, not for their intrinsic material value, but for their astronomical symbolic weight. They represented fertility in a world where infant mortality was devastating, spiritual knowledge in an era when understanding natural cycles meant life or death, connection to the divine feminine in societies that venerated the creative forces of nature. They were Paleolithic NFTs, unique, portable, loaded with cultural meaning that transcended linguistic and tribal boundaries. A Venus carried 1,000 kilometers, instantly communicated status, knowledge, and spiritual connections to anyone who saw it. Isotopic analyses of human teeth reveal that specific individuals traveled enormous distances during their lives, returning to their birthplaces laden with exotic objects and impossible stories. They were the first international commercial agents in history. People specialized in maintaining active networks through epic journeys that redefined the limits of what was humanly possible. Imagine the unimaginable psychological pressure, carrying objects that represented sacred alliances between tribes, knowing that a mistake, a loss, a betrayal could result in bloody conflicts lasting generations. They were diplomats, traders, explorers, and spiritual guardians simultaneously. Evidence suggests that some objects acquired their own biographies, accumulated stories about their journeys that increased their symbolic value with each transfer. An obsidian blade was not just a tool, it was an artifact that had saved lives, sealed alliances, and traveled through worlds that existed only in stories. Where analyses on precious objects show that many were never practically used, they were purely symbolic, carried and displayed, but never functionally employed. It was the birth of the concept of luxury, of value beyond utility, of meaning that transcends function. The price of progress. Scene, dramatic transition. Paleolithic scenes fade like smoke. Modern images of Amazon warehouses emerge, robots moving packages, faces illuminated by screens. And then something extraordinary and irreversible happened, the agricultural revolution. Around 10,000 years ago, in various parts of the world simultaneously, humans began to domesticate plants and animals with a determination that would forever change the destiny of the species. Cities sprang up like mushrooms after rain, populations exploded exponentially, technologies advanced at an ever-accelerating pace, but we paid a price that we are still discovering and psychologically processing. Jared Diamond, in Guns, Germs and Steel, argues convincingly that agriculture brought systematic social inequality, devastating epidemic diseases, and organized warfare on an industrial scale. But perhaps we lost something even more subtle and profound, the evolutionary need for intimacy with vast, diverse human networks. Our Paleolithic ancestors personally knew hundreds of people spread across thousands of kilometers. Every exchange was deeply personal. Every object carried multi-generational stories. Every journey strengthened human bonds that lasted decades. Compare that to pressing a button on Amazon and receiving a product manufactured by people we will never know, in countries we may never visit, using resources extracted from places we don't even know exist. Modern neurological studies using fMRI and other brain imaging technologies suggest that our brains are still fundamentally calibrated for those intimate Paleolithic networks. That's why digital social networks are so addictive. They activate the same neurological circuits of tribal gossip that kept our ancestors alive. That's why compulsive consumption momentarily satisfies us. It mimics the dopamine of successful exchange that signaled status and security. That's why we feel diffuse anxiety in large urban crowds. They exceed our tribal capacity for social processing. The paradox of modern connectivity is that we have never been so technologically connected, yet levels of loneliness, depression, and social anxiety are at historic highs. Perhaps we are trying to satisfy Paleolithic hunger with digital fast food, many superficial connections instead of a few deep ones. Anthropological evidence suggests that the transition to sedentary agriculture broke down reciprocity networks that had evolved for hundreds of thousands of years. Suddenly, humans went from networks spanning continents to villages spanning kilometers. The world became simultaneously smaller and more isolated. The eternal echo scene returned to the opening, the Paleolithic man offering the obsidian, image gradually transforming into a modern person offering a gift, faces merging through time. That man walking with his precious obsidian 40,000 years ago was not just exchanging volcanic stones. He was building humanity's first audacious experiment in true connectivity, a global network based entirely on trust, narrative, and reciprocity. He was inventing the very idea of civilization, not through technology, but through social technology. Every time you send a gift to someone distant, you are echoing a 40,000-year-old instinct etched in your genes. Every time you trust a stranger in an online transaction, you are using mental software developed around Paleolithic campfires by people whose names have been lost forever. Every time you feel inexplicable pleasure in giving something without expecting immediate return, you are channeling the strategic generosity that kept our species alive during ice ages that lasted millennia. The Stone Age Amazon teaches us something profound about human nature. We don't need technology to genuinely connect. We need stories that create shared meaning, trust that transcends superficial differences, and the ancestral courage to carry gifts across distances that seem impossible. Perhaps in all our frantic digital connectivity, we are just desperately trying to rebuild something that our ancestors already mastered with intuitive perfection. The next time you feel a longing for something you can't name, a melancholy without a specific object, remember? It might be the genetic longing for a campfire you never saw, for people you never knew, for a lost time when every object had an epic story, and every story connected entire worlds. And if our ancestors managed to create functional global networks with nothing but stone tools and stories told around the fire, what else are we capable of achieving when we truly decide to connect with the same courage, generosity, and vision they had? The future of humanity may not lie in more technology, but in rediscovering social technologies that we already perfectly mastered 40,000 years ago. In an increasingly fragmented world, perhaps Paleolithic wisdom is exactly what we need to find our way back home. If this epic 40,000-year journey has made you fundamentally rethink what it means to be a connected human in a modern world, leave a like and subscribe for more stories that connect our ancestral past with the urgent dilemmas of the present, because profoundly understanding where we came from might be the key to discovering where we have the courage to go.